Welcome to your asynchronous session number 5 for Algebra 2B. We're going to talk about data collection and different methods of sampling and what they are and how they can be used. So the objective is that at the end of this, you will be able to identify the sampling techniques used to gather data. So if you look at a study and they tell you what they do, you'll be able to identify, oh, that's this type of sampling, or oh, that's this one. So let's start. So the first one we're going to talk about is when we are doing a sampling, there's a few different things that we need to know. So we need to know the population, so that's the who. That's the entire group of people that you are interested in surveying. So that could be like everybody in the United States, or everybody in the world, or maybe everybody at Primavera Online High School, something like that. The next thing that we need to know is the sample, which is also a who, but the sample is a part of the population is asked the survey, and their answers are used to draw conclusions about the entire population. So the sample is who we are actually asking the questions to, and that is what we use. Sample size is the amount. So that's how many people we're asking, whether we're asking 10 people or we're asking 200 people. Whatever the size of our sample is for how many people we are asking. So now some bad sampling methods. So there's good and there's bad ones, but depending upon what you're doing will depend upon whether or not they're good or bad ones. So here's one of our ones that's kind of a little bit more, not one that we really want to use very often because we won't get very good data to be able to use and make a conclusion on. So it's called a convenience sample. So it's a sample where the interviewer selects the people. So individuals are choosing based on convenience. The sample is usually biased, so bias means favoring one outcome over another, and the answer does not represent everyone's opinion. So let's say that a way that I would do this would be if I want to do a convenience sample. Let's say I go stand in front of Safeway, and I ask, as they're coming out, I ask, well, do you prefer Safeway or fries? Well, of course, that's going to be a biased survey because they're all coming out at Safeway, so they probably prefer Safeway over fries. But it's a convenient sample for me because I just go stand outside a store and I just ask everybody that walks by. So that's what a convenient sample is it's very convenient for the interviewer because you just ask people as they walk by. A voluntary response sample is another one of the bad methods. So it's a self-selected. So individuals volunteer their answers in response to a general invitation. This one is usually also biased, and people with strong opinions are more likely to respond. So have you ever received like emails or anything like that to where you have an email that comes in and they're asking you for a survey, and so it's either, alright, I'm going to click on the survey link and I'm going to do the survey, or no, I'm not going to do the survey, so I just delete it. So this is why it's a bad sampling, because it's whoever wants to answer it. So if you do a voluntary response sample and you say something about, oh, who likes to go to school is like what your survey's on, well, those that really like to go to school are probably going to be ones that are going to give you their opinions, where those that don't like to go to school may not, or they will give you their opinions because they have very strong opinions about going to school. So now let's start talking about some of the good sampling methods. So the first one we're going to talk about is the one that is used most often, is a random sample. So drawn in such a way that each item has an equal chance of being drawn. So an example of a random sample is, let's say I want a random sample of 100 students from Primavera that I want to ask some questions. So what I'll do is I take everybody who goes to Primavera, put all of their names into like a bag, and then I'll pull out 100 names. So it's completely random because everybody has the same chance of being drawn because everybody's name is only in there once. So everybody has the same exact chance of being drawn. So it's a random sample, which is a good sample because you're getting randomly selected people. There's no sort of bias or anything in there as to who you're choosing. So the next one is a systematic sample. So this is a step-by-step procedure of choosing every nth person, and it's normally a good representation of the population. So let's say that I'm part of like the city of Phoenix city council or something, and I want to know some opinions about people on an upcoming bill that's coming into the election. Well, I could do a systematic sample to where I take all the names of everybody who can vote in the city of Phoenix, and let's say I want to ask every 10th person. So they're in like alphabetical order. So I'm going to go down the list, and every 10th person I'm going to call or email and ask them the questions on my survey. So that gives you a pretty good representation of the population because you're asking every 10th person. So it's still a random sample, because you're still asking it in a more random way. It's not like, oh, I'm just going to select the first like 5 people, or I'm going to select all the people who, if I'm like, let's say it's a city council person and they're a specific party, that they might choose only the people in their party because they want it to show what they want it to show, and the people that are in their party are going to say the same thing. So let's see if you can do some of these. So we're going to start doing some examples and see if you can tell me which one it is now that we've gone over some of the types of sampling. So match the sample with the sampling method. A teacher wants to know how many of her students have pets. She decides to ask every 4th student on the class list. So go ahead, take a second and see which one you think it is. Alright, so now that you've had a second to think about which one it is a systematic sample because you're asking every 4th student on the list. So that's a systematic sample. So let's do another one. A radio station wants to know if teens like to listen to the radio. They ask teens to call the radio station. So go ahead, think about it for a second. Which one of the choices is this type of a sample? Alright, so now that you've had some time to think about it, let's go ahead. Well, they ask teens to call in, so that means that the only people that are going to respond are those that call in. So that's a voluntary response because they're asking people to call in, so you have to voluntarily call into the show to give your response. So that's a voluntary response sample. The first 20 people entering a water park are asked if they are wearing sunscreen. So this one is a convenience sample because you're just doing it by convenience. I'm just going to stand there and I want to get this done as quick as I can, so I'm just going to ask the first 20 people that walk in, and then I'm done for the day. So that's a convenient sample because it's very convenient for the person who's taking the sample, and it doesn't give you a very good representation. So see if we can do this one. A raffle ticket is drawn by a blindfolded person at a festival to win a grand prize. So this one is a random sample because there's raffle tickets, so everybody that put in a raffle ticket has the same chance. Each raffle ticket has the same chance of getting pulled, and since the person is blindfolded, they have no clue if they're actually picking their own or if they're picking somebody else's. So it's a completely random draw, as you just reach your hand in the bag and you pull one out, and that's who gets it, so it's completely random. So a restaurant owner wants to find out how often people go out for dinner. He surveys 50 people as they leave his restaurant. Is the sample representative or biased? Explain. So for this one, since he's surveying the 50 people as they leave the restaurant, it's going to be biased because he's asking people who are out to dinner. So obviously they go out to dinner since they're out to dinner at the restaurant. So people not out to dinner will not be represented in his survey because if you're not going out to dinner, that means you're staying at home and you're eating at home. So everybody who doesn't go out to eat would not be represented. So this is going to be completely biased, and it's going to show that people like to go out to eat. But that's only because he's asking people as they leave his restaurant. A principal wants to know if his students care about being on time. The first 50 students to arrive at school are surveyed. Identify the type of sample and describe the population of the survey. Then tell if the sample is potentially biased. Explain your reasoning. So the type of sample that we're doing is it's the first 50 students to arrive at school. Well, that's definitely a convenient sample. And then the population would be the whole entire school student body. And of course this is biased because they're the first ones there, so obviously they care about being on time. If they didn't care about being on time, why would they want to get to school early? So he's clearly getting a biased sample to try to show that his students are on time to school and like to be on time to school. So we got 2 more sampling methods to talk about still, now that we've done some examples. So we have a stratified sample. So the population is divided into subgroups. So there's many different ways you could divide it. You could divide it by race, gender, age, or any other type of subgroup that you would like to do. Individuals are then chosen randomly from each subgroup. So if we do it by like gender, so we split the whole entire population into male and female, and then we go ahead and we say, oh, I'm going to choose like 50 males and 50 female. Well, then you're doing a random sample because you're just going to have all the males and females, and you're just going to randomly pick 50 of each. So an example of this would be, in order to create a Stugo club, students in elementary school are classified according to their grade level, so whether they're in 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. Then a random sample of 3 students from each grade level are chosen as the representatives. So then they take each of the grade levels, so they'll take all the first graders' names, put them into a bag or something, and pull out 3. And those are the 3 representatives for first grade. They'll do the same thing for all the second graders and the third graders. So this is a stratified sample, sometimes also called a stratified random sample because you're adding some randomness in there based on what the subgroup is. And then we have cluster sample. So a cluster sample is the population is divided into clusters that usually have something in common. So maybe they all, if we're doing it of the whole U.S., we can divide it into the states. They all, whether you live in the state or not. Neighborhood, school, whole clusters are then chosen randomly. So an example would be, suppose we wanted to compare discrete test grades between Maryville and Trevor. Those are 2 schools in Phoenix. The clusters would be the different periods of discrete at each school. To compare grades, we would pick a period from Maryville and a period from Trevor, not individual students. So that would be a cluster sample, as we have the 2 different schools that we're looking at, but we're looking at just all the discrete classes. So then from there we would randomly choose one of the periods from Maryville, choose one of the periods from Trevor, and we'd look at the test scores for those to compare them and see what it is. Okay, so those are all of our different sample types. So remember, now that we have gone over this, you need to go back to the asynchronous activities announcement and click on the Check for Understanding link and fill out the Check for Understanding about the different types of sampling.